closed.
Excellent. And Mr. Record Secretary, are there any reports to be read?
There are no reports to be read.
Are there any motions not on notice? Are there any motions on notice? Sorry.
There are no motions on notice.
Are there any motions not on notice?
There are no motions not on notice.
Excellent. And finally, Madam Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are still no fines.
Excellent. I cede the floor back to the chair. Avalon? You're muted.
I call this house adjourned. Yeah, now I do it.
Woo! See, pretty quick and easy, a bit silly, but we get through it pretty quickly. And now we move on to private business, which is the actual debate. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Dr. Jamie Hartles to take the chair for private business or for public business.
I call this house to order and call upon the record secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
So I was going to open up this with a joke about how gay clubs are kind of like Nirvana, but never mind. I don't know how this debate is going to go, but all I can say is poor straights. Like, there's only one other place they can go to get fancy cocktails and dance with men wearing far too much cologne. And those are on package holidays. And if there's one thing that lockdown has taught me, it's that people really don't like long-term routine and monotony, even when it's easy. And this got me thinking about the nature of having the crack. So basically, package holidays, they're all well and good for a short time. They're so easy, they're very relaxed, it's kind of perfect. But there are only so many pina coladas you can drink before you want to wrestle that cocktail umbrella off the small Spanish man and make it yourself. And despite what we might like about short holidays, we don't really want the world gift wrapped and handed to us day after day the exact same way. We want to have the crack. We want to live vicariously, to shake it up a bit. And so I was wondering, what would someone who was born in a package kind of holiday resort look like? You know, how would this person learn and grow and develop? As to what they look like, probably fat, sunburnt, and a Brit hater. Although there won't be many Brits, I don't think, in resorts, mostly because COVID shut down the Canaries months ago. And after Brexit, they'll have some luck getting holiday visas anywhere other than the Giant's Causeway. The point being, sorry, that the few things are much good, if at all, that feel and look the same. So once COVID is over, try go out drinking and dancing somewhere new. Try going with new people, doing new things. But if you could please just do us one favor and wait till lockdown's over, that'd be great. Because I'm really looking forward to having a pint at Christmas. And I don't need you lot, gay, straight or otherwise, messing that up.
And are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Then I shall duly sign. I should now like to call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the house.
Sorry. Thank you so much. This evening, we're delighted to have Dr. Hartles as in the chair this evening. She is an assistant professor at the State University of New York. She obtained a BA in sociology and anthropology from Randolph College and a master's in sociology from the University of Oxford. She also has an additional MA in sociology from UVA and a PhD from the University of Virginia. Her research interests include identity politics in feminist and gay rights movements, and she's the author of paper Questionable Queer, Understanding Straight Presence in the Post-Gay Bar. And we're absolutely delighted to have her as chair this evening. Thank you so much for being here. And also, I'll just take this opportunity to quickly run through some speaking orders for this evening. So speeches will be 7 minutes in length, with the first and last minute protected. You'll hear a bell when we hit the first minute, when we hit the last minute, and then when when you're done the 7 minutes, the bell will be rang twice. You'll also see some visual signs from Julie, our treasurer, holding them up. And the first and last minute are protected. They are protected from POIs, or points of information. So what is a point of information? It's basically an opportunity for someone on the opposing side or someone in the audience to question the speaker. It's a great way to keep the debate engaging and make it interactive. You can offer POIs through our Q&A function or by typing POI into the chat. POIs may be off, and you and also if you're a speaker, you can also unmute yourself and ask it, but only ask for like a POI rather than just asking your question while the person is talking. And you can only ask that question if they accept your POI. Sorry, I think I explained that badly. You think after 8 debates of doing this like this way, I'd get used to it. But yeah, and then this evening we'll have a vote at the end of the debate to see which side wins. That will be taking place over Zoom. And yeah, I think we will also have oratory returns this evening. Oratory returns are just a way for you to rank what you thought of the speakers. It's completely anonymous. Please fill them out, because at the end of the year, we actually give an award to the best speakers from these debates. And there's actually like cash prizes. So please fill them out, because it really means a lot to the speakers. And yeah, you can see the link to the form in our chat. And yeah, without further ado, I will cede the floor back to the chair.
All right. So the question before the House this evening, sorry, I don't know what teacher means, regards straight people at gay bars. And I would like to call upon the first speaker to propose the motion to the House.
Ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, dear straights, let me be clear. I have nothing against straight people, and this side of the House has nothing against straight people. I have actually nothing against anyone. And this motion is not about being for or against straight people. This motion is not whether or not to ban straight guys from gay bars. This motion takes reality in its entirety, looks at the observations on the field. And what is this reality? This reality leads us this side of the House to regret that these places of opening to queers are so frequented by straight people. And what is this reality? It is that of the excesses caused by a certain minority of straight people. And I can give you a few examples of excesses, which my fellow speakers, I'm pretty sure, will also give a lot. When you have predatory straight men coming into get with gay girls, when you have milder situation, just the fact that gay bars with straight girls will then have a place for a cool space, but then it's tough for lesbian girls to know if they're into girls. It's all these situations, the fact that it's not a safe space, or the worst scenarios where you will have hate crimes happening. A lot of excesses from a minority of people. But let me be clear again. I have nothing against straight guys. Otherwise, I'll have a lot against myself, actually, 4 years ago there. And I don't feel like stabbing myself on this debate, the one I was a few years ago. But all the rules and laws that we know today were created with only a few exceptions as a basis, which were enough to establish a framework. And it is because of these exceptions that I'm defending the motion this evening. But now, the solution is not to ban them, because then, who are you to ban them? How do you measure people's sexuality? Is this an exact science? Do you know of a device that can determine people's sexuality? These boxes make no sense. And that's why I sincerely believe that the solution lies elsewhere. Yes, I feel this regret that emanates because of the excesses of some. I feel that regret. But now I think that straight people, like everyone else maybe, when they enter these places, which are these bars, they must undo, they must untie and detach their labels. They're now only open-minded individuals, of course, knowing their preferences, but willing to open up to what may be different from their personal standards. And this is the state of mind that would change my opinion on this motion. But this is not yet the case. But it is the example to follow. Pointing out and making straight people feel guilty would make no sense. It is better to change the standards. Yes, I feel again this regret, but I don't lock myself in a bubble. It is very good and quite honorable that straight people, like everyone with a gender or sexuality identity, are curious about something else. Curious straight people are often singled out, like people who don't accept themselves, who hide behind a label. Those who have these opinions reveal an incredibly regrettable close-mindedness. What a hypocrisy. Since when people have not had the right to break away from the Manichaeism from which our society borrows too much? Let them discover. But I agree, at this point, the label should disappear. A straight curious should not identify or have as an identity in these places only the word curious. I think that the exceptions that I mentioned earlier, which are the source of all the excesses, would not agree to be detached from these labels. So the solution could work. This is why I really believe in the need for this open-mindedness, this spectrum, to counter the situation which prompts me to support this motion. The rule is that I think all of them must be labelless, to be completely on the way to integrating in these places of openness, devoid of judgment. You will then enter the gates of tolerance. Nothing should be closed or sectarian. Allies, friends should be welcome. But here is the condition, the pact, the contract that we must have to make. You should all come to these places of open-mindedness, for sure, but be prepared for receiving a smile, a flirt, a free drink, a flirtation, a dance from the gender you may not be attracted to. Appreciate these moments, and then, but only then, I will change sides on this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to now invite the second speaker for the opposition.
Hiya, everyone. Can you all hear me? My internet is very bad. Mead internet is awful. Even a little Mead is awful. Cool. Right. So, right, I'll start now. Right. So I was actually remembering my last time at the George, which is kind of one of the only gay bars in Dublin now, unfortunately. Right. I mean, a few friends who are like casually walking around the corner at Gay Spar, and like then me, like as usual, looking as if I've been like dragged through a bush sideways. This is important to the story. Like, keep it in mind, right? And then you like meet this massive group of presumably straight women, right? This is so cliche. And then you're walking by and it's as if like in some kind of like weird reverse heckling, you're walking like the runway of Drag Race, because you get like the entire contents of like a BuzzFeed article on queer slang like thrown back at you like as you walk by. And I would like to say that in like our heads, I think most of us are going like, not happy with that. But in reality, we should salute these people, right? Because these people are great, okay? Yeah, right? And First Prop was right? Straight people have caused a lot of harm at gay bars. I 100% agree. A lot of the problems that Jan talked about, I'm not going to argue with them. They totally exist. But on balance, right, straight people at gay bars has protected, helped, and nurtured the most vulnerable in our community, right? I'm going to talk about young queer people. These are the people that I want to talk about. Now, not specifically in terms of age, but people who are only just coming to terms with their gender or with their sexual identity, right? So unfortunately, I don't think I need to explain to anyone here the painfully high suicide rates and mental health issues among queer youth. This isn't news to anyone, right? It's been around in our community since they even started doing these studies, right? Thank you, Matthew. And then I think the very act of speaking at this debate means most of the speakers here and the chairs and everyone here is probably fairly comfortable with their gender identity, right? This phase in their life is probably behind us, right? I think I'm right in saying that for most of the speakers, even most of the audience here. But I think I want everyone to think back to that time in their life, right? Really think back and put yourself in your position, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago. For some of us, it may be now, but for some of us, it may be way in the past. Put yourself in that position. And if you didn't experience that yourself, put yourself in that position, right? Us established, right? I'm using that word in inverted commas, like queer people, right? Aren't who I care about most in this debate. I care about our younger selves, right? Because the journey of coming out, right, which is an unfortunate journey that many of us actually have to go on, most of us actually here probably have to go on, right? It's almost like a perverted rite of passage that we shouldn't have to take, but unfortunately we all do pretty much, right? And if this doesn't apply to you, you're either straight or you're really lucky, which again, fair enough, like, but I don't think this applies to the majority of people here, right? This stage in life is when people are most vulnerable to all the problems, all the mental health problems, the suicide problems I've talked about, right? And these are the people that were most badly affected, that have actually benefited most from straight people in gay bars, right? Because let's face it, a lot of young queer people don't have queer friends, right? And this is just a habit like of circumstance, right? This isn't because they don't want queer friends. It's because A, less people are out when they're in school age, right? That's simple. But B, people like generally come from a school where you only know the people in these schools, right? Maybe it's different from people from Dublin, but I can speak like from rural Ireland. You don't know anyone outside your school, or maybe like you have the boys' school and the girls' school and you know each other. That's about it, right? You don't know anyone else. You have a very small group of potential friends. At most, you might have 1 or 2 queer friends. It's unlikely they're going to be out, or they're going to be open, or they're going to actually, like, if the likelihood of finding 1 or 2 queer friends in this entire school is pretty unlikely, right? Multiply this multiple times as you go back in time. Regress motion, we are talking about the past, right? So what does this mean, right? You don't have any queer friends. This means that under this motion, right, you aren't actually going to go to gay bars. This is obviously a bad thing, right? I think this is a bad thing just because you aren't actually meeting other queer people. It's kind of a catch-22. You can't go to these places because you don't have any queer friends, but you can't go into these, you can't meet any queer people because you can't go into these places, right? This applies to queer spaces generally, but more specifically to gay bars, right? Going anywhere that you don't know, like that you don't know anyone, is really difficult, right? If any of us have walked into tutorials, sorry first years, this doesn't really apply to you, but walk into tutorials, right? You know you look for the friendly face, like you know you go and sit with the person you know, right? You don't go in going, oh, I don't know anyone here, yay, right? You sit beside the friendly face, right? Imagine multiply that fear that you feel going into a place where you don't know anyone, when you go into a tutorial and you can't find anyone you know, by 1,000,000 times for these people. They are at the stage in their life where embarrassment and kind of like social anxiety is at its highest, right? And they are like struggling with their identity. And they're going into these really scary, like from the outside spaces, right? So they just won't go in, right? I'm just going to say the majority of these people just won't go in. So we're depriving the majority of queer youth at the most vulnerable stage in their life from meeting other queer people, right? Like just awful, okay? Secondly, I'm sure we'd like to believe that gay bars are like this paragon of virtue, right? They aren't. I think we can all, like, anyone who's actually like been in any gay bar, right? I'm only talking from experience, mostly in Dublin, can say that they actually aren't perfect places, right? I think I don't need to tell anyone about, like, anyone who's braved the bathrooms knows that there are serious sexual assault problems in these places. Just going to leave that hanging there. There's a problem with date rape, drugs. There's a problem with all these issues, right? What mitigates these problems the most? I'm going to say it, friends, right? The same problem that you're not going to go into these places is the same problem that makes you worse off if you go into these places. Having friends around you, as I think any girl's parents will have drilled into them, is the most important way to stay safe on a night out, right? And I think we would like to believe that if we didn't have straight people in these places, they would all be wonderful, like, again, like I said, paragons of virtue, but they aren't. Let's face it, most of these problems actually come from other queer people, right? In these spaces, they come from other queer people, including mostly actually gay men, right? Or bi men, or men generally, I think I'm just going to stick with, right? So we are sending, right, these brave few people of this vulnerable age straight into these places without help, without support, without the friend groups that are needed to keep them safe, right? It's intersectionality, right? That's why art students like buzzword today, right? They are young, they are vulnerable, they are queer, and they're going to these places without any friends, right? I think all of us have these stories about where our friends have basically saved us, like on nights out. Personally, I know there was me and 2 or 3 straight friends actually at a bar, and then one of my other gay friends was going off, basically got perved on by a man, had to come back to us and like us basically like form a protection around them in like a corner while we were dancing to stop this person getting in and groping them, right? This isn't unusual. Anyone I know talk to knows this kind of story, right? And it's not their fault. I'm not victim blaming here. I am simply saying the reality, the unfortunate reality that these bars are great, but they are not paragons of virtue. Sorry, Judy, I know I'm over time, but it's so important that we keep these people safe and we allow them every opportunity to stay safe by actually going into these places and going into these places with people they know, rather than going into these places alone, scared, and without help. Right, sorry, I'm over time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce the second speaker for the proposition.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. You know, I just want to state, first of all, I did my makeup for this in the HIS committee meeting. So everyone should appreciate it. That's how busy I am. I also got 2 shout outs in the committee group chat. So naturally I had to mention this. I'm very proud. So a little bit of background. I come from a very straight family, very heteronormative. They're breeder types, except for my great uncle and his very special friend. They died before I was born, but from a young age, I can remember my family members reminiscing on my Uncle Francis and how much of a performer he was. Anyways, I was thinking about what his life was like. And my grandfather actually had no idea that he was gay. And it's just bizarre to me, you know, that the older family members, my grandmother still believes that they were just 2 best friends who lived together for most of their lives. And that was normal, you know, like they were roommates. That's fine. And so it was within this motion that I realized the importance of queer spaces, and that my 2 uncles, without queer spaces, they wouldn't have been able to live their lives to the fullest. And I mean, probably that they had their private lives at home, but the existence of gay bars gave them an opportunity to be vaguely public. And even though it was this very small and hidden community, because of course this was when homosexuality was illegal in Ireland, they still could go public within this, and they still had a trusted community. And then I compared their existence to my own. I will never understand how awful it is to suppress your sexuality in front of your family, because mine are very accepting and open, even though they haven't figured out that my great uncle was gay. And for your whole adult life, I do understand how invasive how invasive it can be for straight people to invade what you perceive as a safe space. I understand that, you know, a lot of people don't have these comforts, but I regret this motion simply because of the horrifying interaction of accidentally hitting on a straight girl. You have no idea how embarrassing it is to finally come out of your shell as a very shy queer woman and gain the confidence to ask the very pretty girl on the dance floor for her number or if she wants a drink, only to be treated, frankly, like dirt. I've tried to buy a drink or ask for a number from several women in queer spaces who have turned out to be straight, and instead of politely declining, I've been made feel like I'm a gross pervert for even suggesting they might be queer or they might be interested in me. And this affects me personally because, you know, it's terrifying to be a woman and be any way queer, because you just feel like you shouldn't exist under this patriarchal situation we have in Ireland. So initially, I didn't really care about this motion. I actually signed up to be opposition because, you know, I'm a welcoming person. I'm quite friendly. And I didn't think much of straight people being in queer spaces as long as they're friendly. But then I reminisced on the times I actually did hit on women. And Jesus Christ, I do cringe when I think of myself being rejected by straight women. And it's really this insinuation that there's something wrong with you for being interested in them. It's a really assurance that there is something wrong with you for being queer. And they're in a queer space, and for some reason they expect me to see their bubble of straightness, and I'm kind of straight passing, like I'm a straight passing bisexual queer girl, and I feel the need to re-emphasize my biness. I can't roll up my jeans any further. I physically cannot walk. I can only hold so many tote bags at once. I can't drive. How many more stereotypes can I possibly fulfill? Please suggest more in the comments. I'm running out of ideas. I'm tired of having to ask a girl if she listens to Girl in Red or Sweater Weather, or if she's even heard of Marie Antoinette. And have you ever been the only LGBTQ person in a room? It's really intimidating. Once people found out that I was gay in my all-girls secondary school, and I use the word gay because they didn't think bi was a thing. That's another whole can of worms. And like that would have been too much for them to think of abusive questions. Even people that I was really close with would ask me about threesomes and how do gay relationships work. And I think that straight people often forget how intimidating it is to be out, and they're unnecessarily invasive. And I think straight people, and I hate to generalize, forget that gay people exist in queer spaces. Straight people are so relaxed in comparison to queer people in places like the George, and I just don't understand it. I don't have that much beef with straight women. I did come out of one. I don't know. I just feel like gay culture is most appropriated by them. And that's not even mentioning how dangerous straight men can be to the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm placing a trigger warning here in case anyone wants to mute me because I'm mentioning violence. But 350 trans people have been killed this year. 331 were killed last year. And they are killed for existing. And that's why queer spaces exist, so they can exist peacefully without the threat of violence. And I'm not going to elaborate more on this because it can be triggering and it's an awful subject to touch upon. But my point is that queer spaces are a refuge more than anything else. And often their safety is compromised by straight people because they just don't understand. So I'm not trying to say that all straight people are dangerous. They're the worst, but they're not dangerous. There's something about a hen party in a gay bar that just doesn't sit right with me. It's like they're on safari and like they're looking for a mystical gay best friend or perhaps a token lesbian experience. And I just feel like queer spaces operate as an entertainment value for straight people. Straight girls appropriating gay culture can be harmful. And when hen parties and things like that just kind of don't really see gay people as fully human, they bring the gaze of the outside world with them. And in a way, gay people have to go back to conducting themselves the way they did in straight spaces where they're not, outwardly themselves. And I feel like there's so much I could say about women and the community as a whole, but I just feel like my existence doesn't matter a lot of the time. I'm a bisexual/queer woman, and I say queer because I'm unsure of my placement within the community and within my own gender. And that's a whole other thing. We won't get into it. I'm not unloading my trauma on everyone tonight. But admittedly, I feel like I've been used as a pawn by gay men, and it's the existence of queer spaces that allow me to blur the lines of my existence. A lot of the time, I feel rejected by everyone, both gay and straight, because of me being bi or queer and not sure of what I am. And really, queer spaces like the George allow me to just exist peacefully, exist without harming anyone or having to explain what I am. And it's how I adapted to college life. I didn't have any gay friends before college. You can imagine how traumatic that was. And it's where we can be in the majority for once and where we can feel the most comfortable and protected. And these spaces give people who can't be out publicly for whatever reason somewhere they can be themselves. These are places where trans and gender non-conforming people can hopefully feel physically safe and recognized and away from a world that isn't always so accepting. I don't think that straight people should never cross the threshold of the George again, but I do think perhaps they should do their research before going, or at least attempting to do a death drop. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce the second speaker for the opposition.
Hello, I'm Eve, and today I'm going to ask you to oppose this motion. I'm opposing because I believe that straight people going to gay bars allows them to better support and understand their friends. And I also insist that saying we regret straight people at gay bars leads to gatekeeping and prevents gay bars from being the accepting environments to question and explore sexuality that they are meant to be. My first point is going to be quite similar to Ben's, but I think it's different enough. Or I can examine it from a separate way, which is that straight people can come to gay bars to support their queer friends, and that going can also help them to better understand the LGBT plus community and therefore reduce the dangers of otherization. As Ben said, there are LGBT plus people whose closest friends or some of their closest friends are straight. Many of us here in Trinity will have a lot of queer friends and friend groups. That is not the case for everyone. There are plenty of queer people for whom straight people make up the majority of their friend group. They may want to be able to go out with those straight friends while still visiting the gay bars in which they feel safer than in other bars. Say, for example, if you're a fresher who is still far closer to their school friends, all or most of whom are straight, but you want to go to a gay bar, maybe to meet other queer people, maybe just have fun in a place where you don't feel like you have to act straight, you will very likely want your straight friends to be with you. I know I would, as I have straight friends who invariably make me feel better when they're around. Straight people are amongst the best people at making me feel confident, when I'm nervous. And if I'm in a situation where I'm expected to A, flirt with people, or B, dance in public, I'm almost certainly very, very nervous. Straight people at gay bars can and have provided a protective and supportive function, and that is a function that is particularly important to people who are queer but have not yet been incorporated into the queer community at large, as Ben was saying. But this motion would have us decide that the presence of such friends is something to regret. Allowing straight friends to go to gay bars with their queer friends also encourages straight people to think of queer culture not as a niche, separate and oppositional world from some sort of heterosexual norm, but of straight life and queer life as constituent and equal parts of a broader and interconnected society where we are all responsible for each other's rights and well-being. It allows straight people to better understand their queer friends and their lives and to better understand queer culture's place within society as a whole. This fights back against attitudes of otherizing that allow stereotypes and hatred to grow among straight people, and makes young closeted queer people think that coming out will create a huge unbridgeable rift between them and their straight friends. I believe it is also important not to construct more barriers between straight and queer people because it makes them out to be more different and less able to cooperate than they actually are. Such a disconnect is dangerous because it means that straight people feel less emotionally invested in the well-being of others. If you do not know anything about a different group, if you never see them, you are less likely to intervene when they are mistreated and you're more likely to believe misinformation about them. The fact is, some queer people really need their straight friends and want to have them around. Let them have them around. Don't separate people more than they're already separated. It helps no one and it makes us more isolated and safe. I will take POIs now if anyone has them. No, excellent. My second point is that the passing of this motion will lead to gatekeeping and will prevent gay bars from being safe and accepting places for people to have fun outside of heteronormative environments they should be. One of the big problems with passing this motion and therefore declaring that straight people are not welcome at gay bars is that it will result in some LGBT plus people being excluded because they are not deemed queer enough. As Jan said, you cannot be entirely sure if somebody is LGBT plus or not. Therefore, when we decide that straight people are not welcome in gay bars, in practice, this means that people who do not appear straight will not be treated in a welcoming way in gay bars. We know that there have been gatekeeping problems within the LGBT plus community. For example, the erasure of asexual people or bisexual people, as Eva mentioned. This proves that the community is not yet free of attitudes that seek to create a rigid and exclusionary ideas of what counts as queer. Meanwhile, COVID-19 has proven that some people will take it upon themselves to judge and police others, regardless of whether they know the other person's situation or difficulties. If we say we regret straight people in gay bars, we imply that we do not want them there in the future. If we decide this, there will be people who will take it upon themselves to enforce this policy of exclusion and intentionally make people feel unwelcome. In doing so, they will inevitably make mistakes. Not only will the atmosphere become tenser, more suspicious, and generally less fun, it will also lead to the exclusion of queer people not deemed queer enough. Even if we do take people's word for it on their own sexual identity, there are some people who may openly identify straight but actually be questioning privately. They may want to check out queer spaces without there necessarily being taken and then coming out. They may conclude that they are queer, they may conclude that they are indeed straight, but such people should be welcomed and respected, not regretted. It is also worth mentioning, I think, that some straight people come to gay bars precisely because of the reputation that gay bars have of being places of tolerance that aren't so dictated by traditional heterosexual gender roles that hurt everyone. Obviously, as Ben was saying, gay bars are far from perfect, but they do have this connection with human rights, which makes them, which means that there is at least a commitment in the community, generally, if not with everyone, that we do reject these patriarchal structures, we do reject inequality. Some straight people, particularly straight women, come to gay bars because, with a history of human rights struggles, they are deemed safer spaces than other clubs. If some straight people like gay bars because they are seen as more fun and less judgmental, I say we embrace that. It is also a fantastic thing to see different minorities or underrepresented groups supporting each other and providing spaces for each other. Whether it be queer people supporting striking minors during Thatcher's era in the UK, or synagogues offering spaces of worship to Muslims after far-right attacks on mosques, such gestures of solidarity are things to be celebrated, not regretted, as compromising the identity of the welcoming group. I think it would be a pity for us to insist on keeping the positive aspects of queer culture to ourselves when they could help and benefit others. Yes, there will be the odd person who makes a joke of it. There will be people who are insensitive and stupid. There will always be people like that. There will always be people who abuse generosity and hospitality, but that does not mean that generosity and hospitality should be given up. Tonight, I have argued that straight people in gay bars allow straight people to better understand and support their LGBT plus friends. I have also argued that the passing of this motion will lead to gay bars being less generous, less open spaces with more judgment and gatekeeping and less solidarity, generosity and openness. For these reasons, I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that. And now I would like to turn our attention to the next speaker for the proposition.
Hi everyone, so thanks for having me. I did have a nice highfalutin speech with theories and intelligent arguments and so on. I've decided that I'm going to keep it simple and get straight, no pun intended, to the point. First, let me set the scene. It's Thirsty Thursday at the George. You all know it, don't pretend you don't. Drag Queen Supreme Davina Divine is on at 11 p.m. sharp. Entry is free. You are queer and excited to finally breathe in a safe space that is your own, surrounded by like-minded people. Your outfit is banging, glitter equipped, poppers potentially in your pocket if you're that way inclined. ABBA is blaring. You are buzzed. You've come to a judgment-free zone to explore yourself, let loose, and to enjoy the general scene that is queer debauchery. You dance close with fellow queer pals, hold hands, but something is amiss. Someone is watching you, and you glance over your shoulder to see a tall man donning a dad shirt, cargo shorts, bucket hat, sunglasses, and pint in hand. You notice him nodding and smirking a greedy smile every time someone kisses. Your gaze shifts uneasily, and swallowing hard, you turn around, and there they are. Aaron's hen party, declaring their acceptance of Ellen DeGeneres, and yelling over each other about how difficult Caitlyn Jenner's family must be finding this. You see it. Your world stops. Your glass drops. Your jaw also drops. Right in front of your very eyes in Dublin's own self-professed most popular gay bar, unmistakably an unforgivable straight couple grinding horrifically offbeat and out of sync before your eyes, living out their weird sexual fantasy of being some minority forced to compete in a dance battle they've unknowingly to themselves already lost. I don't suggest that we take invasive measures and screen people at the door of gay bars or place bans on straight people attending gay bars. What I'm unapologetically calling for is straight people just to have the moral decency to abstain from invading queer people's safe spaces when the number who do attend gay bars are quite obviously totally unwilling to show even a fundamental level of respect towards queer culture. Clubs are not labs for straight experimentation, queer bars are not novelty-themed club nights, and queer people are not floats in a carnival parade. Asking straight people not to attend gay bars isn't about discrimination or straight hate. Granting straight people a gay bar card is going to have little to no shift of any significance towards the public perception of the queer community. And we all know it, because it's exactly what's happening right now, or rather what was happening back when Corona wasn't a thing. The only reason that we're here debating this topic tonight is because society has never taught straight people how to deal with rejection and the fear of, because they've never had to face it in the way that queer people have. Suddenly, queer people asking for a safe space without straight people is equivalent to the centuries of abuse, murder and violence that the queer community has had to face. This notion of reverse discrimination is quite frankly disgusting, completely ridiculous, and is only thrown around because people can't handle being told that they're not allowed. What straight people don't understand is that it's not about straight people. It is simply about queer people wanting to be around other queer people. Even suggest that having a queer-only space further drives the divide between us and them is failure to recognise that the very root of the problem is that queer people couldn't even have their own safe spaces to begin with. It is to erase queer history and queer struggle and queer validity. Straight people justify their presence in gay bars by saying they feel safer, with complete disregard to the fact that sexual assault and abuse also exists within the queer community and is not exclusive to people who are cishet, unaware that they are protecting their completely idealized form of what a queer person should be. Not to mention the fact that these straight people are then almost immediately offended if someone who is queer looks at them a little strangely when they touch them without consent and then drunkenly spits something out like, "Oh my God, I'm not trying to hit on you, you're gay." Queer people are minimized to a demographic every hour of every day, and straight people seem to find it bizarrely disappointing when the queer people that they do meet don't quite meet their expectations. Straight people love mainstream queer culture. It's a given. Do they love queer people? Sometimes being an ally involves an element of discomfort. Sometimes being an ally is knowing when to step back and when to recognize that your place is not that place. Queer people still need a space where they enjoy themselves and feel safe and comfortable. If anyone here thinks that queer lives are not at risk, I would like to point you to one of our biggest examples that I can think of at the moment and send you in the direction of Poland 2020. Safety and not being subject to degrading treatment are human rights, and I can bet that nobody in this Zoom room would willingly take the action in good conscience to invade a space that is not their own just to have a daring night out at the expense of someone else's comfort. When straight people and society as a whole are ready to make the transition from performative to active ally, when straight people are ready to expand their vocab past a couple of seasons worth of Drag Race quotes, when straight people are willing to put their pronouns in their bios and not worry about whether people will think they're trans or non-binary, when straight people stop getting the sweats when someone queer hits on them in a queer space, and only then will I be willing to revisit the topic of regretting straight people in gay bars. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now we're going to turn our attention back to the opposition again with our third speaker.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Thank you for the floor. My name is River Cook. My pronouns are they, them, and I'll be speaking to oppose the motion that this House regrets straight people in gay bars. My argument will follow two primary thrusts. The plausible deniability for people to have access to a gay bar as a closeted person, and the question of whether cishet passing people ought to have to verify their status as bona fide members of the community before they are allowed to enter, whether it be by means of a enforcement or even just a social norm preventing their entry. Let's go back for a moment to the origin of gay bars and establishments. They were not in ye olden times bright day glow pink outlets with LGBT all spelled out in bold neon letters, defiant pride. Oftentimes, back in the day, gatherings had to, for the safety of the patrons, be of a clandestine nature. Such was the structural homophobia that seeped through every layer of society. While things are unquestionably better now than they were back then, let us not delude ourselves into believing that everyone is so fortunate as to find themselves in a position where they are immune to the possible consequences of being unwillingly outed. A great many people are unfortunately closeted out of necessity, whether it be by the fact that they are dependent on homophobic parents, in a transphobic workspace with other few avenues of employment, or in a position where their continued security is contingent on their concealing themselves. To all outward appearance, they're straight, they're cisgender, heterosexual, and for their safety, they must insist on as much. In spite of that, they live a lie, but they have to. But should that fact, they are in no such position to disclose their secret, mean that they are excluded from entering a space by means of social norms that was intended for them to be able to find community, because there's no way to tell them apart from a normal straight person. Ultimately, there is no such means that are intended to verify a person's authentic membership of the queer community that can so successfully exclude cishet people without serving as a roadblock to authentically queer people who have a genuine need for discretion, since in much the same fashion as transphobes today demand physical inspection for entry to gendered spaces, you are inherently judging their expression on how queer you perceive them to be. And this goes the opposite way as well. It is by no means impossible for any straight person to lie so as to gain entry to a gay bar. Certainly, it doesn't escape me as to why the proposition feels as they do. Gay bars are certainly a place where one can feel as if they are not an outsider, a place where they can enjoy themselves, open up, express their sexuality, and perhaps meet with some other people. And certainly, when COVID is over, if I head down to Straight 66 and someone I approach protests that, no, I'm straight, I'll certainly be alert and go like that meme from Arrested Development. I don't know what you should have expected in a gay bar. But I will at least appreciate that there is a reason why we don't demand a gay ID card at the door. Once again, if we shout loudly that straight people must avoid our clubs, it does become altogether harder for closeted people to explain themselves if they are seen by people who do not want them to be seen. Alongside this, I don't feel it's inappropriate to mention the current situation which these clubs find themselves in. At present, particularly in Dublin, rents are through the roof and clubs are closing every month, even without COVID. While it may be frustrating when someone turns me down, it does spoil the exclusive air of the place, they are wont to buy a drink or 7, which does ultimately contribute to the survival of the clubs. If we were to erect declarations that cis heterosexuals were to stay away, we may well be cutting off our noses to spite our faces. Ultimately, there would be no gay clubs if no one can go to them. And throwing out a paying customer is a move that would have to be made with caution. But sure, let's suppose that for the proposition, this is a hill worth dying on, a hill worth having all these clubs go bust to protect the sanctity of our spaces. How is that to be enforced? Is it a spot check at the door as to whether, in your opinion, they look authentic enough, they look like an authentic enough queer in their presentation to enter? Or does the proposition believe that they ought to have to prove their membership of the queer community, a concept that should rightly horrify us all? There is no dearth of history of exclusion within the queer community against fellow members for being insufficiently lesbian, insufficiently gay, or insufficiently trans. I am hesitant, therefore, to support new opportunities for members of the community to shout straight passing as justification for blocking out deserving and legitimate members of the community from spaces that they belong to. Take, for example, an opposite gender bisexual couple. How would they, if such a stance were being made explicit, to avoid the judgment as to whether this house would regret admitting authentic members of the community based in crossfire? While I appreciate that this is not the intention of the proposition to exclude valid members of the community, I am puzzled as to how they believe this can be accomplished without catching innocent people in the net. There are, as mentioned, genuine issues of judgment and objectification in gay bars, but I feel like hanging up a big sign that says no straights allowed rather misses the point, doesn't solve the problem. Queers are plenty capable of sexual assault too. I, unfortunately, in 2018, suffered one at the hands of someone who was certainly by no means straight. Throwing straights out won't solve this problem. At the end of the day, it is upon us to put in place actual policies that tackle the issues and not decide this group of people is far more likely to commit these offences than other groups of people, and so let's make sure that they're not. Ultimately, it is a question of what we are looking to preserve. What draws me to gay bars is not my confidence in the fact that nothing around me has been trod upon by heterosexuals, but that I will be accepted for who I am, and that the normative eyes of society are not on me. Straight people can bring violence, but not as if they are exempt from the other prohibitions, and queer people can bring violence. This problem has to be addressed by tackling the problem, not targeting a group that is more likely to commit it than the mean. Ultimately, there is no way to enforce any ban on straight people that will not result in crossfire, and as such, I would ask the House to oppose this motion.
Thank you very much for that. We are now going to turn our attention to the final speaker, I believe, for the proposition.
Yes, that's me. Hi, when I say queer, I mean LGBTQ+.
Sorry, actually, Matthew, we have Martha on proposition.
Oh, great.
Who is a maiden speaker. If Rita wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I'm having such
Sorry, Martha.
My muting and unmuting this evening. But Martha, because this is your first time speaking in chamber, or at least our virtual chamber, you have maiden's rights, which means that no one can POI you. However, if you waive your maiden's rights, I, at the very least, will applaud and scream and just like generally freak out. So would you like to waive your maiden's rights?
I'm fully willing to waive my maiden's rights.
Woo!
Woo! Woo! Go, Martha.
All right, and everyone can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. June 28th, 1969, right? Marsha P. Johnson throws the first brick at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich in Manhattan. I think the counterfactual in this debate, in this regrets debate, honestly does go back to Stonewall. I think that's where we're going back to change the past. Because before that, straight people didn't want to be a part of our space. So I genuinely think the likely counterfactual starts there. And what that world looks like, a world where we regret what has happened and we can accept this is the alternate world, the one that happens if straight people didn't invade gay bars the way that they have today. What that looks like is a world with queer spaces that have never been invaded or perverted by straight people the way that they are today. This is a regrets motion. We're not asking to ban people anyway, which is something I agree with the opposition. Banning people could cause problems. No one is disputing that, but we're not talking about that. What we're talking about today is the fact that straight people have perverted these spaces and have genuinely hurt those of us who needed these safe spaces. We're also not saying that questioning people or even these supportive friends that opposition is talking about aren't welcome in gay bars and shouldn't be there, although it is not a straight person's role to be the white savior of queer folks' struggles. No, so that they can just feel good about themselves. That's not a straight person's role. And if they're in a gay bar to do that, they genuinely shouldn't be there. But we really need to be talking about the people worthy of regret, which is the straight girls who go because they want a cultural experience. It's the straight men who go because they think they can turn lesbians or turn bisexual women into straight women just because they think they're correct. And the thing is, if I was a straight girl, I could go to any bar, but I'm not. I am bisexual, and that means that I don't have that available to me. Please let us have gay bars. We're not asking for much. And look, I'm going to respond to some of the speakers in the opposition first. So look, Ben, you genuinely stated a few very good points, right? Coming out is a perverted rite of passage that we all genuinely have to suffer through, and a lot of people suffer through for a long time. But I don't think you can say straight people are responsible for nurturing young queer kids. That's not their job, and no one's asking them to do it. And I also think it's not necessarily true that young queer folk don't always have queer friends. I certainly think when people go into university and perhaps the age where they might start going to gay bars, they do tend to find a community, right? But maybe it's the Dublin effect. But the vast majority of my friend groups have always been queer. Even before I knew I was bi, that was always the case. And I agree, look, gay bars are not a magical safe place. I'm aware there are problems of date rape and sexual assault. They exist in every bar, including gay bars, but no one is disputing that gay bars, this magical place where nothing is ever wrong. We're just saying it's a space we deserve to have. And Eve spoke about people going to gay bars to support their queer friends, which is important, but there are other ways you can support your queer friends. You can go to protest with them. You can read up and educate yourself about the issues that they suffer through, or you could just talk to them and ask about their experiences and what they're suffering through. You can come to a debate like tonight's to see actual queer people talk about what it's like to be queer in a world where the world doesn't want you to be. And also just straight people not being emotionally invested in my experience as a queer woman is not my burden to carry. I don't care if they're not emotionally invested in it. It's none of my business. And frankly, if they don't care, that's on them. But just, I agree, leading to gatekeeping could be an issue. This is something the op have brought up, but I don't think that's what this particular motion is going to lead to. Just regretting it, saying that the action of straight people invading gay bars has been a problem will not necessarily lead to gatekeeping. And gatekeeping has happened and is bad. And I'm not saying, straight passing people therefore should be kept out of queer spaces, because I'm not proposing a world where I'm not allowed in a gay bar. But a significant amount of gatekeeping of people who are not deemed queer enough happens because of a fear of straight people encroaching on a space where we're all supposed to be safe. And it's not a good thing, but that's part of why it happens. And then Giles, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but I think your point on plausible deniability, it's important, but people being closeted out of necessity in the rest of their lives still happens and is what happened in the past. And these are the people who need gay bars the most, I think, because people needing to stay closeted the rest of the time was always the historic necessity. That's always what happened. But these people have always been welcome in queer safe spaces. And if there was one place where they were allowed to be themselves, that's important. And having straight people pervert that is a really bad thing. And also the straight people we're talking about are the ones who are taking advantage of the acceptance that we have in gay clubs. Straight girls who don't want the ego boost of being hit on tonight, straight boys who do. That's not something we think is a good thing to have. And generally what we've heard from OP is that sexual assault still happens in the queer community, which is bad and no one is disputing. And what happens if gatekeeping gets worse, which we also think is an issue, but just genuinely regretting straight people in gay bars where they don't belong is not necessarily going to lead to gatekeeping itself. I'll take Eve's POI before I go on.
You said that you don't really care whether straight people are emotionally invested. I wasn't really implying that it's important that straight people would have kind of soft feelings about gay people for the sake of it. But I think it is we are still a minority, and being a minority is still a dangerous position. Therefore, having the majority willing to protect us still does matter.
absolutely fair, and I completely understand the point we're making. I think, from my point of view, I think people who are going to be convinced that they're about the issues their queer friends are facing and are the ones who are going to gay bars are probably not the people who are actively discriminating against us. And while I think perhaps some people do come around and become aware of the issues that we're facing, I think there's other ways for them to be educated than coming into safe spaces. But I also think they're not the most important party in this debate anyway. Those aren't the specific straight people that we're regretting the most. It's the ones who make our safe space unsafe. And I think, just for me as a young queer person, I think that a gay bar is supposed to be the one place where I'm meant to be safe, where I'm supposed to be comfortable in my own skin, where I'm supposed to be able to hit on a girl without her looking at me like I am the one who has made a mistake. It's not somewhere for straight girls to go so they can have a cultural experience, a nice hen night out with something different, right? It's not somewhere for a straight man to go because he's convinced he can turn me fully straight. A beacon of hope for so many young queer people like me. Because when me and another queer fresher are texting each other, making friends really quickly because we've realized that neither of us have been to a gay bar and that George has always represented this beacon of hope for both of us. That is very important, that we can have that space in our lives. It's important that we can have that image of a place where we're okay to be ourselves because we couldn't be in school. Because maybe we will be in university, but not everyone can. It's important we can have this beacon of hope without it being perverted by people who don't belong there. And on those grounds, I think it's incredibly important to propose this motion. I've never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And now we're going to hear from our final speaker from the opposition.
I'd like to shout out Martha for an astounding first chamber speech and Soz for jumping the gun at the very beginning in front of you. My name is Matthew Charlton, as some of you might know. I'm second year in law and politics, and I'm a Martha McKinney Perry stan. And you may know me from the video Oliver Frisk and I did for the HIST's Movember campaign, where we bleached our mustaches. Something that I regret actually is that Movember focuses its branding on mustache hair, which I unfortunately grow a lot less fast than other facial hair. But, you know, we digress, and I implore you to donate to our charity campaign at the link I'm sending into the chat right now. Speaking of regretting, I regret the analysis we hear from Proposition that with the presence of hetero people at queer bars, queer people who obviously only go to drag gigs, gay cocktail parties, gay raves, and sex listening parties to get their bit are now less able to do so. That framework is heterosexual. It's the belief that clubbing exists for one-night stands, Wes-esque snogging, where pre-drinks is one group of men or one group of girls, where the aim of the night is to score. Clubbing for queer people is a place of freer self-expression, as emphasized by everyone in this debate. It's glitter, it's dancing, it's work bitch for the 4th time at 3 a.m. and no one minding. It's community, it's shared experience, it's celebration of queer-made culture. And then we then hear how embarrassing it is a few times to hit on people who are not attracted to you due to their sexualities not aligning with yours. And this argument is entirely valid. It can do so much to knock the confidence of a queer person. Why it does not stand in this debate is because the humiliation of someone telling you they are not attracted to you is bad, but it is definitionally worse. And trust me, when the person saying that has the potential to be attracted to you and their sexuality does align with yours, rather than having that very valid excuse in the first place. This motion also contributes to bisexual erasure because, as you all know, but this analysis maybe does not, bisexual people exist. For a bisexual woman at a queer bar, why would this house regret her meeting the man of her dreams who happens to be hetero at her local queer space? Or the same for a bisexual man like myself, vibing with straight women at queer spaces. Passing a motion expressing negativity at the presence of these straight people at queer bars invalidates the experiences of bisexual people and presumes that the queer community is homogeneous. Did you get it? Homogeneous, like homogeneous. Yeah, that's good. Speaking of homogeneity in the queer community, we cannot let this motion pass because it is verging on being trans exclusionary, something not brought up yet. No, we cannot internally redefine the motion to mean cisgendered heterosexuals because it did not say that. And the fact, then that fact in itself is an error so serious it must not be overlooked. The fact is that a large proportion of transgender people are heterosexual. This means they are straight. This means the motion regrets having these people at queer spaces, and this, because it disproportionately affects the trans community, is discrimination against trans people. And another important point relating specifically to what trans to what straightness is, and how impossible it is to identify what that is, as was brought up by Jan very excellently, is that it is not a clear-cut concept and thus cannot be treated as the proposition proposes to propose. While many of you here may have known or acknowledged your queerness or fully understood your gender from a younger age, this is not the experience of a vast proportion of LGBT people. This motion thus means that anyone who is not out or exists as a cisgender heterosexual person is informally excluded from enthusiastically finding their identity and finding their expression in these safe queer spaces. Also true is the fact that passing a motion that regrets these people's presence in these spaces, keeping in mind that it's impossible whether to tell someone as part of the LGBTQ community internally, puts these people at a greater danger and discomfort when they are at these spaces, and perhaps puts them in very grave danger when they are forced to try to explore their identity in less welcoming spaces. Let's also not look past the fact that the motion calls these spaces gay bars, which is an example of the patriarchy in the LGBT community, as Eve touches on, where hetero media defines us only by one of the many identities and experiences within the community, and that one identity happens to be the one run by men. I don't think that we can look past that as voters and say tonight, oh, well, maybe it was only a typo. Well, if it was a typo, then why did they not say lesbian bars instead of gay bars? I'm obviously being facetious, but if you're hungry, I just gave you some food for thought. As the last speaker, I have the privilege of having heard all of the analysis in this debate before having to speak. And I want to give a final reframing of what cis-het people in queer spaces actually means. So from personal experiences, it means queer people being able to go to spaces that celebrate them, along with the support of any of their friends or family members, as Ben did great analysis on, which was then mischaracterized as heterosexual saviorism. Not everyone has large groups of friends of exclusively LGBT people who they can go to these places with, keeping them safe, keeping them secure, keeping them happier. It also means larger audiences and attendance at these places, which directly puts more money and support in the hands of queer business owners, queer bar staff, queer security personnel and performers. And it's a simple fact that without the participation of heterosexual people in the drag scene, there would be a lot less money, funding and success and widespread recognition of, for example, the queer art form that is drag. And, you know, I don't want to watch RuPaul's Drag Race with its season 1 filter, as you stands might also align with. And we would be watching it with that filter again, without the audience of hetero people, many of which were likely introduced to drag in queer spaces. The way up here seems to be, do we pass a motion that directly places negativity on people whose demographic they cannot change? Or do we accept the realities that proposition is giving us over and over again that are all very deeply valid of our world? We acknowledge that there are cisgender heterosexual people that act terribly in queer spaces and continue to progress and continue to adapt. And we want to continue to educate rather than simply regret their presence as a whole, as a generalization in the first place. We oppose the motion on opposition, if anything, because it is not kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for all of our speakers. So I will now put the question to the House. On the motion, the House rejects straight people at gay bars. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those against, please vote nay.
So this is the time of the night where it's filled with suspense as we're waiting for everyone to vote. It's very unfortunate that due to some weird Zoom thing, we actually cannot, the panelists cannot vote. So please, all the people in attendance, please do vote. We'll give you guys about a minute to make up your mind. Usually you just shout and we just basically listen for which side is louder. But I suppose this way is a bit more exact. It's, you know, a bit better. But yeah, first and foremost, thank you to all the speakers this evening. Really fabulous speeches on both sides. And honestly, debates like this make me really happy that I'm auditor of a debating society and we can have these discussions. I just want to give a shout out to Martha for doing her first speech in chamber, and she also did it very last minute. Like, there was a dropout and she was willing to step up, and I applaud you so much for doing that. So excellent speeches and excellent speeches all around. Cool. How many people have voted, Maggie?
Just 2 people haven't voted yet. We'll give you another few seconds. Okay, very last chance to vote.
The suspense.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So, a close result.
So by a very narrow margin, it appears that the motion has been rejected, or motion is defeated, sorry. All right, so as the chair, I was told it is now my moment to kind of sum up the debate and also share with you a little bit of my own research about this topic. So first off, this kind of goes back to the beginning of the debate. I want to thank the auditor for the very kind introduction more generally. I always feel like when I get introductions like that, I'm like, how do I ever live up to how really awesome you made me sound? So thank you for the very kind introduction. So to kind of add on to the introduction, so my name, to remind you, is Dr. Jamie Hartles. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Farmingdale State College, which is part of the State University of New York system. So hello from Queens. It's interesting to kind of the opportunities this pandemic has kind of created despite all the downsides for all of these cross-national collaborations. And I really enjoyed hearing all of your speeches. And I really also enjoyed how in sync and in line both the proposition and the opposition speeches were to what I discovered in my own research and what I think the very tight nature of this resolution shows, which is that this is a question attached to it. It's a question people are deeply in disagreement with, but also deeply ambivalent about. I saw that in both the proposition and the opposition sides of a willingness and awareness of the validity of both perspectives on this question. So one thing that I thought I could do as a scholar and as an expert, I suppose, although I always hate claiming expertdom on this topic, is give a little bit of historical context and a little bit of sociological context for sort of what atmosphere this debate emerges within. So the first step to this is thinking through how the function and quality of LGBTQ social spaces has changed over time, which is something that a couple of the speakers brought up. So the gay bar as an institution really didn't emerge until modernity, when it came to massive urbanization, which gave people that we would now understand as LGBTQ unprecedented opportunities to socialize with similarly minded people away from the oversight of their rural communities and all of the condemnation that might come with that. So we started to see, kind of as early as the turn of the 20th century, the development of LGBTQ social enclaves and social spaces and bar spaces where people who, as many of the speakers had mentioned, were highly stigmatized at that time period, criminalized by legal statutes, sodomy statutes that made it a crime for individuals of the same gender to have sexual interactions with individuals of the other same gender, individuals where the psychiatric institutions were largely still treating homosexuality as a mental illness. So this was a time period where there was a really heavy need for individuals to find each other and build community and develop these really safe spaces where they could be protected from the severe stigma of society and where they could meet other people, both for romantic and friendship purposes. But what's also important to understand about these spaces back in the day prior to the Stonewall, as someone brought up, is that these were spaces that were, in addition to places of big community building, were also places of high risk, right? They were also often places that were run by criminal organizations because it was often against the law during that time period, such as the case was with Stonewall, for bars to serve alcohol to individuals who were quote unquote understood as deviants. So what this means is that these were spaces predominantly for the LGBTQ plus community. They were not spaces that, as a couple of the speakers mentioned, straight people would find themselves. Because to find yourself in a space like this and to be identified as being in a space like this would be highly socially stigmatizing, could lead to the loss of livelihood, could lead to potentially criminal prosecution if you were swept up in a bar raid. So, however, as the movement has progressed and as we've started to see greater tolerance and acceptance amongst heterosexuals and the straight community, we've started to see attitudes towards LGBTQ social spaces shift. So as the communities become less stigmatized, although as many of you have pointed out, by no means unstigmatized and undiscriminated against, there have been these new, you could frame them as opportunities if you were inclined to do so, for more socialization and community building across sexual identity labels and categories. So we've kind of seen this on two senses. So sociologists of space have noted that around the 1990s through the 2000s, we started to see a big shift in both how LGBTQ people socialize and also how heterosexuals socialize with the LGBTQ community. So we saw, for example, a greater willingness for LGBTQ individuals to socialize within spaces that were traditionally seen as heterosexual spaces. So bars that for quote unquote for straight people became bars where many different individuals felt safe and secure. We also saw major demographic changes where LGBTQ people were increasingly willing to live outside these more progressive urban areas and in areas that are more traditionally seen as conservative. And as we've sort of seen this movement of the LGBTQ community out towards the quote unquote heterosexual community, we've also seen a change in how heterosexual people have related to LGBTQ spaces. So these spaces that were once, for example, stigmatized by the state, these spaces that, you know, you could be criminalized for occupying, are now ironically spaces where state governments often invest money in. If you want to look to the US, there's a well-known trend where many US cities will put in a lot of money to kind of brand traditionally LGBTQ neighborhoods, or quote unquote gayborhoods, as we often say, right? To kind of what would have been once a place that straight people would have avoided, it now sort of becomes a space where many straight people, as many people who are speaking noted, increasingly want to visit, kind of as a cultural opportunity, as a place to see a new culture, a new way of being, new cultural practices. So what we've started to see in recent years that I think kind of drives and frames this resolution is an increased willingness of straight people to occupy LGBTQ social spaces. So historically, as many of the speakers have mentioned, a lot of this drive has been from straight women, women who were looking for a space where they could safely socialize without having to worry about a lot of overtures of men, a lot of risks of sexual violence from men, catcalling and harassment from men, but also spaces where they could socialize with their gay male friends. But we've also seen a rise in, as many of you have also noted, straight men increasingly not avoiding these spaces at the rates that they presently did. So this is the kind of context that this debate is framed within. And this question of, is the presence of straight people in these spaces problematic where it emerges? So when I interviewed for my project, I interviewed LGBTQ individuals about their attitudes towards straight people and their presence. And I tried to get a sense of, did they perceive this as being a space? Sorry, I lost my train of thought, apologies. So I asked LGBTQ plus individuals, did they see this presence as a negative? Did they see it as a positive? Did they see risks? Did they see downsides? And what I saw in my research was that there was a strong discourse that was very reluctant, as of course many people in this debate seemed reluctant to do, to draw very harsh lines against the presence of straight people in LGBTQ spaces. So there was a pressure to be welcoming, a sense that the community should often feel welcoming to heterosexual people, that these people being in these spaces was a sign of progress, as many individuals said that individuals who were in these spaces were potentially people who were exploring their own sexualities, and that we should encourage that it was exclusionary or even discriminatory to exclude straight people. But what I noticed was, along the lines of those strong positive feelings towards straight people, or senses that they were a sign of progress, the practical dimensions of incorporating straight people into these spaces was somewhat problematic. And it was also specifically problematic for some of the more marginalized members of the community. So in other words, while a lot of my respondents in my study thought straight people were fine or even desirable in LGBTQ spaces in theory, in practice, there were challenges. And some challenges that were brought up were challenges that many of the speakers brought up. So I would only kind of lightly reference them here, but some things that were challenging that people brought up was, of course, the difficulty of identifying other LGBTQ people. So if one of the functions of an LGBTQ plus space is for LGBTQ plus people to find one another for dating or friendship purposes, the presence of straight people who, as of course many of you noted, are not immediately identifiable as straight, could create challenges. And I found in my research that those challenges were disproportionately borne by lesbian and bisexual women, because as I mentioned, there's a gendered skewed dynamic to which straight people tend to embody these spaces. So we found, for example, in my study that, women, because they were already straight women were already more likely to be there than straight men, they were much more likely than gay men, for example, to hit on somebody that was the wrong sexuality or feel alienated and unwelcome. And of course, all of this, as the last speaker actually referenced, plays out on a backdrop where many LGBTQ plus social spaces are oriented towards white gay men in the first place. So these are spaces that already feel precarious, and some of my respondents felt the presence of straight people made them even more precarious and unwelcoming. So, and of course, as straight men are increasingly entering these spaces, as some of these speakers mentioned, there is a growing, one might say, new risk of new kinds of violence that applies not only to lesbian and bisexual women, but gay men as well. And that is, of course, as many of you have mentioned, the threat of violence, of men feeling violently angry that they were hit on by gay men, or men hitting on lesbian or bisexual women who kind of went to these spaces to be safe from that. And also straight women who also go to these spaces to be safe from that. So I know we're already crunching the end, and I'm sure all of you are about ready to go home and get ready to work on all of your assignments and things. So I won't keep you much longer than that. Just to say that in conclusion, I see this as a debate that's not going to go anywhere, because spaces are changing. They're becoming more and more mixed, whether we like that or not, whether we reject the presence or not. This does seem to be a reality of who's occupying these spaces. Traditionally, LGBTQ spaces are giving away to spaces that I call questionably queer in my research, spaces that are not clearly targeted explicitly for the LGBTQ community, but for people of a variety of sexual and gender identities. So these questions are going to be ones I think we're going to kind of hit against time and time again, and it's going to be a challenge for the establishment of safe spaces. All right. So that is all I have for you. I want to thank you again for inviting me, and I really enjoyed hearing your debates.
Cool. Thank you so much again for a fabulous chair speech. And I suppose at this point, we usually discuss our upcoming events. So would either of the Q Soc speakers like to promote any of Q Soc's upcoming events?
I do want to promote upcoming events, but first I do want to ask again, what is the House's stance on Big Meath? Because I think this is a very important question that I think the nation does demand an answer to.
Ben Mahon, comment on Big Meath.
As the resident HIST Meath committee member, I think we need to have a debate on this, and we need to have a debate now. Breed, if this isn't scheduled for next week, I will actually be resigning. And I will have it, I have it in writing, nearly ready to go, ready to be sent to you.
Motion for the maidens final.
That's true, Maeve. I kind of haven't made a bit of this.
I will be there. So, in terms of actual serious promotion, tomorrow is Thursday. So we are running, hopefully, a trans and non-binary closed space. So anyone who is trans and non-binary can come there. We'll talk through lots of stuff, and hopefully everyone will come away some of the wiser from it. There is something tomorrow evening. Actually, I won't talk about it because I'm not sure what your relationship is with Phil. We're sort of double dipping. There might be a debate with the Phil possibly, hypothetically, about the commercialization of LGBT culture, but I can neither confirm nor deny that for fear of being booted from this call. In terms of stuff that I feel like I can talk about safely, there is an asexual and aromantic closed space on Friday, which is very cool, and you should go to it. And finally, on Friday evening, I will be talking with a few other people on a panel with Q Soc about the effects of quarantine on mental health, in particular with regards to the queer community. And I do hope that a lot of people come up with that, because it looks like it's going to be really cool. So.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that. And now it's my turn to shamelessly plug the HISS's events. So first and foremost, we have a reception after this. It's a Netflix watch party. I believe the link is in the chat. If you have any trouble with Netflix Party, the Chrome extension that you can use to basically watch it with us, feel free to stick around and I will go through technical issues afterwards. Like, I'll just explain how to do it. It might make it easier. But yeah, first and foremost, please fill out your order returns. It's super useful, and considering the high level of the high standard of this debate, everyone deserves the praise and the marks that they can get. If you enjoyed this debate, you might enjoy our other debates. We have debates every Wednesday night. Next week's debate is "This House Would Ban Facial Recognition Technology." Again, if you're interested in speaking in that debate or any of our other debates, feel free to check out our term card. It's on our social medias, but it's also on our website, and you can sign up there. Also, tomorrow, following the theme of Rainbow Week, we have a panel discussion celebrating LGBTQ plus voices in Ireland. So that's at 5 p.m. Tomorrow, and it features two Irish drag queens, Victoria's Secret and Volia Gavesson, along with young trans activist Dan Bisett, and the wonderful director of inclusion and diversity, the director of Under the Rainbow, Philippa Ryder. We're delighted to be having that panel discussion. Please check out its Facebook page to find the link and register for the webinar. On Friday, we also have a debating games event. We're doing it in collaboration with DU Amnesty, Environmental Soc, Global Dev, and the Free Legal Aid Society. That will be at 8 o'clock this Friday. It's zombie themed. I know, I cannot believe I've managed to run a zombie themed event for the HISS. That's really the main reason I decided to become auditor of the HISS, was just so I could run some form of a debate that is structured around a zombie apocalypse. And I do not know how I convinced 4 other societies to do it, but it's going to be a nice way to, if you haven't debated before, this is going to be just a fun way of engaging debating, nothing too serious, not competitive. It's just literally trying to teach you some skills that might be really beneficial when it comes to speaking up for your own beliefs, when it comes to activism, when it comes to just, having that classic Christmas argument. You might pick up a few handy tips at this event. And yeah, we also have, if you really like debating, we have novice training every Mondays, 6:30. That's great for if you want to go to any weekend competitions, that sort of thing. Please chat to anyone in our DC department, like Jack Williams, Daniela, Seb, or Hannah. They're all wonderful people, and they'd love to just get you into their little cult. It's not a cult, it's actually really fun, and you get to make really great friends. We also have maidens, so good luck if there are any of our maidens quarterfinalists in the audience this evening. Our quarterfinal rounds are the next 2 days. It's very exciting. The maidens final is in 2 weeks' time, and also I think sometime next week, I'm not sure which day, we will be having the wildcard competition. So the winner of the wildcard competition gets a spot in the maidens final. So if you say only went to 2 weeks of our maidens competition and you didn't manage to make it to a third, or if you just haven't heard about it up until this point, you still have a chance to make it to the final. Feel free to chat to Sean or Rexec. He was the guy who made the funny minutes at the beginning, or else Matthew, he was the final speaker, or else Erin, who was not involved in this debate, but I'm sure she's around somewhere. They're all lovely people. We also do Leinster Schools. That's our schools outreach. We do that on Tuesday nights. So I think our next Leinster Schools round will be in 2 weeks' time, and we always need judges, we always need volunteers. So if you're interested in that, feel free to talk to Laura Egan, our librarian. And I'm almost out of breath, but I think that's everything. Please join us for our Netflix watch party. It should be good fun. And again, I'd like to thank all the speakers and also our chair this evening for what was a really excellent debate. I personally learned a lot from it, and I thought it was like there was a lot of really excellent ideas, as well as just really, really excellent stories from like all the speakers. So yeah, without further ado, I'll cede the floor back to the chair.
Oh, and the chair's totally forgotten what they're supposed to do. Sorry, 1 second. All right, okay, got it now. Apologies. I should now like to call upon the auditor to announce the Society's forthcoming events.
I just did that. So
honor this house adjourned.
Woo!
Thank you so much. Thank you especially to Dr. Hartles for chairing this debate so excellently, and for a really, really wonderful chair's address, which was incredibly knowledgeable and wonderful to listen to. And I don't know what you mean you have a hard time living up to your introduction, because it's literally just a list of your degrees, which are very impressive. But thank you, especially to all of our speakers, and especially to Q Soc for collaborating with us on this debate. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and yeah, please feel welcome to come along to our reception and to go to our panel tomorrow and all of Q Soc's events and lots of things like that. Sorry, I started by Maeve.
Will I take over and just explain for anyone in our audience who might want to come to the Netflix watch party but never use the tech stuff? Just to explain, you'll need to install a Chrome plugin. So if you haven't used Netflix Party before, or I think it's also called like Teleparty now, I don't know, but you can, I think, use that link. That's a super long link.
That's quite the link.
Yeah, that's a very lengthy link. I hope it works. I didn't just post spam into the chat. I don't think so. But you can use that to basically add the plugin onto your Chrome. From there, you can make sure that like you plug it to your Chrome toolbar. Then you can click onto our link. It should hopefully bring you to your Netflix, and then what you do is you just press on the TP symbol on your Chrome toolbar. But yeah, I hope
so. Feel free to do that now and leave this call if you wish, because I know there's always a bit of confusion when we try to move from a call to the reception. So if anybody needs that link, they can take it down. We'll see you there.
It's also on our Facebook page. That's probably an ease. And I also outlined the instructions a lot clearer on our Facebook page.
Yeah, so you can head off to that Netflix party or our Facebook page. And one last reminder to fill out the oratory returns, because there are lots of excellent speeches given tonight, and we would like to give all of these people's medals.
You know what? Like, I know this was live streamed, but like, will a recording of this be published? And if so, when?
So we should have a recording. It's not a panelist, but we should have the Ellen said we'll be putting the recording up soon. I imagine it'll be a few days, but we can send out that to send it to Q Soc, so you can distribute it to your members if they are interested, and we'll send it out to our members as well. Because it was a really great debate, and it would be nice for people to be able to watch it again. Okay, so without any further ado, I think I'll end this meeting. So yeah, thanks all for coming, and see you at the reception, maybe.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
For having us. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you so much for collaborating with us on this.
Q Soc.
Yeah, no, it's fun.